Izuku Midoriya is the leading protagonist in My Hero Academia and has quickly become a staple in the animanga sphere, right up there with Luffy, Goku, and Naruto, and I'd even say he's surpassed his own peers like Tanjiro, Yuji, and Asta, but that's a conversation for a different day. Despite this though, there's still a large swath of people who don't like Deku, especially after the manga ended, saying his character didn't go anywhere or he never became the greatest hero, and to that I say, you're wrong. So let me tell you why Izuku Midoriya, aka Deku, is the greatest hero of all time. Mild spoilers for the entire series, by the way, manga included. Before I talk about Deku himself, let's set some definitions real quick. The Oxford Dictionary defines a hero as a person admired for achievements and noble qualities. Now, that's a good definition, but it's also kind of vague, so I decided to research what those noble qualities of a hero were. The new definition of a hero, with some more specific noble qualities, would be a person admired for their courage, selflessness, compassion, integrity, resilience, and humility. And I think all of these apply to Deku, and we see as much throughout the entire series. Another key distinction I want to make is how the My Hero world defines heroes, since those are exactly who Deku is directly contrasting. We see in the beginning of the series that hero work started out as this noble profession, but over time it became more commercialized, and heroes went from public servants to celebrities with their own brand deals, fan base, and public image to uphold to maintain their position on the hero rankings. And heroes were no longer motivated by saving people, but by the fame and fortune to be gained from being a hero. This is glaringly obvious with someone like Mount Lady, whose very introduction is about stealing the spotlight from Kamui Woods just to make herself look better, and you also see it inside of Class 1A with Bakugo only wanting to be the #1 hero, or Uraraka wanting to just make money and help her family. Now, before you jump into the comments, I'm strictly speaking on how these characters are at the beginning of the series, not the end. By the end, we see Mountain Lady stop chasing fame, Bakugo becomes more humble, and Uraraka's motivations shift and change entirely. Another glaring contrast would be All Might and Endeavor, because Endeavor is a product of the current hero society where the only thing that matters is power and fame, and this had devastating consequences for him by turning him into this cruel, obsessive, and prideful man who only cared about surpassing All Might. That's not to say he never cared about saving people or being heroic, but the underlying motivation was selfish and prideful. Compare that to All Might, who is obviously the exception to everything I said before, which is why he was the #1 hero for so long. He became a hero to save people and give them a symbol of peace they could rely on, and his fame was just a byproduct of that, not necessarily the main goal. All Might did the brand deals and the interviews and clearly had a cult following, but he never let that interfere with his hero work or change his ideals to chase fame and fortune. I could honestly do a whole separate video on All Might's heroism, but I'll save that for a later date. Today, we're here to glaze Izuku Midoriya, and now that we have a foundation to work with, let's do just that. As we know, Deku falls into the 20% that is quirkless, but despite all of that, he still continued to admire heroes, especially All Might, even in the face of bullying from people like Bakugo, and he never stopped wanting to be a hero who helped people, which was always his driving motivation. So it makes perfect sense that his journey of heroism starts by saving the person who despised him most. As the saying goes, a hero is brave not because they feel no fear, but because they move forward in spite of it, and this describes Deku's mindset perfectly. He had no quirk, no training, and no other weapons to help, but despite that, he still tried to save Bakugo from the sludge villain, while countless pros and civilians just kind of watched on and did nothing. Did he accomplish much? In a more general sense, no, because the fact of the matter is he was quirkless and couldn't do a whole lot, but he did inspire All Might and prove himself worthy of One for All, and his body moved before his mind could think, which is one of the cornerstone elements of the entire series. We see this again in his fights with Muscular and Overhaul, both villains who vastly outmatch him at their respective states in the story, but despite all that, he pushed through and won because of his genuine desire to save Kota and Eri, no matter what happened to himself, and in both cases, he was fighting to save kids he'd just met, something that Kota points out during that fight, not really understanding why Deku would put himself through all of that just to protect him. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention his fight with Stain, where not only was he outmatched in terms of power and skill, but also had two people to protect behind him, so it wasn't like he could just run away and get a pro. He was forced into that fight and had to push forward despite the massive amount of fear that he had. Jumping back a bit, the sludge villain incident speaks volumes about Deku's character, and even when he's powerless, he still takes actions to save people, knowing full well that he may harm himself in the process. And he carries this mentality even when he does have one for all, willingly breaking his bones and hurting his body extensively if it means he can save people. A lot of his injuries come early on in the series, like at the USJ or at the sports festival during his fight with Todoroki, but even after that, he pushes himself too far when fighting Muscular, doing permanent damage to his arms, even though in his mind it was worth it since he saved Kota. This speaks to his immense level of selflessness. Throughout the series, we see Deku constantly prioritize others over himself, which is also why it's so satisfying to see him go after something, or in this case someone, he wants at the end of the series. And the best part is that his selflessness isn't performative. He's not doing this to gain brownie points with people, he's doing it because that's just who he is as a person. It's also not selective. Oftentimes people are only selfless for the ones closest to them, but in Deku's case, he treats everyone pretty much the same. Take his fight with Todoroki, for example. In a matchup that he would have easily won, he decided to focus on helping Todoroki, even if it meant he lost the match and didn't continue in the sports festival, because saving Todoroki from the destructive influence of his father and showing him the true beauty of his quirk meant a lot more to Deku than winning the match, because like I said, he's not in it for the fame and the glory, he just wants to help people, even though he didn't really know him super well. I was honestly shocked when I first watched the sports festival arc because I thought Deku would win purely by protagonist powers, but after rewatching and rereading, I understand why he lost. There was a greater narrative significance there. The same can be applied, like I said earlier, to his saving of Kota and Eri, these two kids who he didn't know at all, but knew they needed to be saved. In Kota's case, it was just fighting off Muscular, but I doubt much people would go through such lengths to save a kid who treated them poorly and then punched them in the nuts. But even still, he refused to leave Kota until he was safe, a goal he accomplished well, and even changed Kota's perception of heroes as a whole. Eri's case is a bit more layered and complex than just fighting off a villain. Yes, that was a huge aspect of it, and there's a lot of saving that does happen during that fight, Deku being one of the first people to call Eri's quirk a blessing and find a positive way for her to use it, compared to Overhaul, who called it a curse and put her through a never-ending cycle of abuse. Deku gave her hope and was a shining light in an otherwise dark and dreary world, refusing to give up on her despite all of the pain that he suffered. The other part of saving Eri was truly freeing her from the trauma caused by Overhaul. She still was just a little girl who went through so many cruel things no kid should have to. Deku recognized this, being the driving force behind inviting her to the Culture Festival, where I'd argue she was truly saved during 1A's musical performance. A song, by the way, you could argue is written from Eri's perspective, but that's just my humble opinion. Now, while Deku's selfless attitude is great, there is a point where it reaches an extreme, that being during the Dark Deku arc. He left UA out of an abundance of caution for his friends, something that was selfless in motivation, but resulted in self-destruction. His selflessness is so rooted in his core that he's willing to shoulder every burden on his own, even if it means losing sleep, getting himself beat up, and isolating from those he cares about. So long as they're safe, his actions are justified, at least in his mind. I like that the series doesn't shy away from these extremes. We tend not to think about how positive traits, when pushed to the extreme, become dangerous and self-destructive. Even his courageous heroics, when pushed to the extreme, put him in near-death situations because he wants to save people, like in his first fight with Shigaraki. Part of his character arc is finding the balance in it all, how to have these lofty ideals and apply them practically without getting himself killed. The solution, quite simply, is to rely on others. It's okay to be selfless and want to protect people, but you also need people to have your back and look after you, which is what Class A is for Deku, a strong group of people who care about him and want to help him out, and after they intervene and bring him back to UA, you start to see this shift in his mindset, beginning to find that balance between heroic and toxic selflessness. As I've said a few times now, Deku's main goal is to save people, even those he doesn't know super well, which includes the villains he fights, and this is a part of his selflessness, but also, I'd say, is heavily rooted in his empathetic nature. I'd wager to say things didn't really change for Deku on the villain front until he fought Gentle Criminal. Yes, he had saved people like Todoroki who were antagonistic towards him, but never a self-proclaimed villain. Gentle Criminal was different. He wasn't necessarily a villain in the same sense as Muscular or Overhaul. He was just someone who initially had good intentions, but then ventured down the wrong path, forcing Deku to approach the situation differently. Gentle honestly wasn't that different from Deku, which he learned in that fight. Everyone, even villains, have goals and aspirations that they want to achieve in life, and they have a driving motivation that pushes them forward, just like the heroes do, which means that things can't be as black and white as Deku previously believed them to be. He could empathize with Gentle, understanding why he was trying to break into UA and what he wanted to accomplish, but there's a difference between empathy and acceptance. Deku can empathize with Gentle in his story and learn the why behind everything, and that maybe not all villains are truly irredeemable evil monsters, but he can also not approve of said actions and want to stop Gentle for the sake of protecting the school. It's also this empathy and understanding that guides Gentle and La Brava down a better path, with both playing a vital role in the final war and even going on to make an honest living after the fact, because Deku inspired a change in someone who didn't have the courage to do it on his own. The same could be applied to Lady Nagan, someone who had lost all hope in hero society until she met Deku, who ultimately changed her heart and gave her a sense of hope again, but I'll elaborate more on Lady Nagan in a future video, and I want to talk about the biggest test of these values and traits that I've talked about so far, and it's Tomura Shigaraki. Deku's courage, selflessness, and empathy are all put center stage when it comes to Shigaraki. He was the ultimate villain, someone hell-bent on destroying society no matter how many innocent lives it cost, and he actively chose this path and definitely was not gonna waver from it, yet Izuku Midoriya was able to see past all of that, to see the suffering child behind all of the malice and hatred, and wanted to save that child. Tenko Shimura is a tragic case of abuse, neglect, and manipulation, all eventually turning him into the Tomura Shigaraki we know. And granted, All For One had a large role to play in that, and the series even tells us how things could have been different had someone reached out while he was lost on the street. Deku was the only person who reached out to help Shigaraki, even if it was too late to save him physically. He had every reason to refuse to reach out and try to save him, because Shigaraki permanently injured his teacher, nearly killed his mentor, actually killed one of his closest friends, and continued to put the world in danger. But even despite all of that, it was more important that Tenko Shimura be saved than abandoned yet again. It was through Deku's insane courage that he faced down Shigaraki during the final war, because, let's be honest, it takes a lot to willingly fight someone who's openly stated they want to kill you. He also saw the results of Shigaraki fighting some of the best pros who still got taken to the cleaners after giving everything they had. Plus, he had to bear the anxiety and fear that if he messed up, thousands of innocent people could die. And Deku set all that aside and fought him so that he could save Japan, but also that he might have a chance to reach Tenko and save him too. It also took immense courage to keep pressing on during the fight, as he gets himself battered and bruised while seemingly doing nothing to Shigaraki, yet his resolve was never broken and he stayed true to his goal till the very end. Which ties into his selflessness, and this is where we get into mild manga spoilers, so you might want to tap out if you haven't read the manga. The only way for Deku to stop Shigaraki and save Tenko wasn't brute strength, but by parting ways with the very gift that allowed him to live out his own dream, One for All itself. We see initially that he didn't want to give it up, which makes a lot of sense, but when faced with it being the only option, he then willingly gave it up in hopes of reaching Tenko. Parting ways with One for All may have been one of the hardest things Deku ever did, but as we've seen throughout the series, he's more than willing to make sacrifices if it means saving others. Yes, in the short term, this meant he couldn't be a pro hero, and likely had to stop doing hero work after graduating from UA, but at the end of the day, his heart posture was one of gratitude. He was thankful that All Might gave him the chance to live out his dream of being a hero who saved people, which all culminated in his fight with Shigaraki. And of course, Deku made an immense effort to empathize with Shigaraki and, like I said, see through all of the malice and hatred to the scared and frustrated Tenko deep inside. He reached out his hand and offered comfort to a kid who'd never received it before, and when Deku tells Tenko, "I am here," that's when he saved him. Everything that followed was Shigaraki, who still chose and believed that the world needed to be destroyed. He committed to being a symbol for the villains and refusing to change, but that doesn't mean Deku accomplished nothing. Even though Shigaraki stayed true to his ideals, he was no longer the crying Tenko Shimura he was before, which means Deku accomplished exactly what he wanted to do. There's another aspect of Deku's heroism that I want to touch on, and what I think truly solidifies him as the greatest hero, and that's how he inspired change on a societal level. As I touched on throughout this video, the current hero society was built on fame, fortune, and self, rather than truly helping others. Deku stood in direct contrast to that, since he never cared about Billboard rankings or the fortune that came with it. He just wanted to save people. It's this mindset that sparked a change in prominent pro heroes like Endeavor and Mount Lady, or even in his fellow classmates like Uraraka, who was inspired by his selfless heroism to follow that same path. And even during the final war, Deku's actions inspired the United States to send over heroes, a country who was fully ready to bend the knee to All for One and had lost all hope. Not to mention all the people from across the world watching the broadcast of his fight with All for One and cheering him on because they saw their new symbol of hope. In a post-war world, we see things like the granny reaching out to Scissormouth Kid and helping him, which ended up saving him and preventing yet another case like Shigaraki, all because Deku showed people that not all villains are truly evil monsters beyond saving, just human beings who may have taken some wrong turns in life and need help getting on the right path again, like Gentle Criminal and Lady Nagan. This series fundamentally changed what the word hero meant. By the end of the series, we see that a hero can be anyone, from a pro who's on the charts to your neighbor next door. It's about helping each other when we need it and being able to rely on those around you to guide you towards the right path. Heroism is no longer about the flashy quirks and high rankings, but about genuinely helping those who need it. Thanks to Deku's actions and inspiration, we know that the villain emergence rate is on the decline as of chapters 430 and 431, meaning that there was a true societal change during that time skip, and a lot of that also has to do with the work done by Uraraka with court counseling and Shoji's work to solve the mutant discrimination issue, but they were both inspired by Deku's boundless heroism, Uraraka especially, and if it weren't for Deku's ability to empathize with villains, she may never have tried to do the same with Toga, which is what led to her court counseling initiative. Something that frustrates me is people discrediting Deku and saying that he never became the greatest hero simply because he wasn't working as a pro and gave up One for All. This sentiment as a whole goes against the very message of the series and what I literally just talked about surrounding true heroism. And as an aside, the whole purpose of One for All as a quirk was to defeat All for One. So, since that goal was achieved, it makes no narrative sense for Deku to hold on to the quirk. If he kept it for a selfish desire of being a pro, then he'd be no better than All for One. Sacrificing One for All was the most heroic thing he could have done in that fight, since he had to put aside his own goals and ambitions for the sake of Shigaraki and society, expecting absolutely nothing in return, which makes the moment he receives his iron suit from All Might all the more special, because after years of selflessly serving others, they came together to serve him and help him live out his dream once again, beautifully paralleling One for All and All for One. If you think Deku became some boring 9-to-5 teacher who hates his life and wishes he was still a hero, you'd be wrong. Yes, he is sad about giving up One for All, as anyone would be if you had to part with your most treasured possession, but even he admits that he can still use his experiences to encourage and inspire others despite being quirkless himself. He's content in his life as a teacher because he can still be a hero to his students, which is precisely what the series is about. That sense of true heroism that surpasses the boundaries of being a pro. And now that he has his new suit, he can go out and fight villains again while balancing that with his teaching job and dating Uraraka. He didn't stop being a hero at graduation, then suddenly became one again once he got the suit. Izuku Midoriya has always been a hero. He didn't need One for All to be one either. From the days as a quirkless kid who tried to fight a sludge villain against all odds, to the full-fledged adult who's still reaching out to those who need it and encouraging people to do the same. And that is why I think Deku is the greatest hero of all time. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Did I cook, or was this just too much glazing? I know this video was a bit longer than normal, but I had a lot of fun making it, so I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did enjoy the video, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my future My Hero content, because I promise you, there is a ton more coming. And as always, a huge shout out to all the channel members, because it's your support that allows me to keep making videos just like this. If you want to watch more, you can check out my video on how the My Hero fandom is ruining the series, or this other video the algorithm thinks you'll like. So, until the next video, peace out.